This TT has been a project of mine for more than a year now. We've done a ton of mods to this car to make it a better overall performer. Brakes, tires, tuning, suspension, full bolt-ons, the list goes on. I want to get specific now. The next few videos on the TT are all going to be about handling. For starters, let's be real and talk about where we're starting. My car is going to turn 21 this year, making it old enough to order alcohol in the States. For being that old, this car handles really good. I want more though. I don't want it to be good by the standards of 20 years ago, I want it to be great by today's standards. Suspension technology has improved a lot in the last 20 years, so we might as well take advantage of that. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be rebuilding and refreshing the suspension with modern components, making it an absolutely insane handling car. It's going to look and perform better. Before we get knee-deep in our first suspension mod, I think it's time we take advantage of the weather. I've been self-teaching vinyl wrapping to myself over the past few months, and my first attempt last winter was to wrap the roof of the TT. I have got a lot better since then, and it's really time that we make a second attempt to remove most of the imperfections. My first attempt had so many problems it's not even funny, but I did it just to learn, so I'm okay with that. It's not something you can do perfect your first attempt. I've had a lot more practice now, and we're in much more ideal conditions for vinyl wrapping, so this attempt should be a lot better. I went in a lot more detail on my vinyl wrapping specific video, so today is mostly just going to be the highlights. To get access to the vinyl, you're going to want to remove both of these trim pieces right here. There's a screw you can access in the trunk, and then they both just pop out. So long as you have enough heat, removing old vinyl wrap won't hurt your paint. Just go slowly and make sure you don't use any sharp objects to peel the paint up itself. It was incredibly warm today, so this came off really easily. I threw away the old stuff and cut out a new piece of vinyl. I'm using a different brand of vinyl wrap that I did the top of the S4 with, and it's from a company called Vivid. This is much nicer vinyl than what I used previously, and when it comes to vinyl wrap, the quality of vinyl definitely impacts how easy it is to install. From a complete amateur's perspective, that is. I used isopropyl alcohol and a tack cloth to re-clean the surface and get rid of any dust before laying down the vinyl. If you have the option, I suggest you get a second person to help you lay it down initially. If you're just doing it by yourself, like I am, you can get one side stuck and then move on to the other side. It takes a little bit of finagling, but I was able to get both sides relatively glossed out before we started actually using pressure to stick it to the car. I've got a lot of suggestions and watched a number of technique videos online to kind of change my approach to doing this. Last winter, when I initially tried my first attempt, it was almost freezing outside, and that is very non-ideal conditions for vinyl wrap. When it's that cold, it's super brittle and it won't stretch unless you use a heat gun, so it's really hard to get it to stretch uniformly. By comparison, it was really warm today, and it honestly just felt like butter. I got the middle stuck to the car, and then I went edge to edge and lifted it up and stretched it out so that I could get all the air out. Any small holes actually could be pushed out through the material itself since it's semi-permeable. I think the most satisfying part of this entire process was tucking it into the weatherproofing on the windshield. I then reinstalled the trim once it was all glossed out. Like I said earlier, I made a video going into a lot more detail on vinyl wrapping itself on my first attempt, and this is just an update of that. If you want more details, check that one out. For a second attempt at doing this though, I think this is much better. Let me know what you think. Now let's get back to the focus of today's episode, upgrading the suspension. The main goal is to get this car to handle better with a byproduct of looking better. The only suspension mod it has so far is new tires and a rear sway bar. Grip is probably the most important part of a good handling car, so when I upgraded those tires a while ago, that was probably when I really started this process. A big part of upgrading the suspension is going to be putting on coilovers. Coilovers lower the car, making the center of gravity closer to the ground, allowing you to corner better. That isn't the whole story though. There is a huge misconception that coilovers by themselves will automatically make your car handle better. Your center of gravity is really only one part of cornering. There's a lot more to consider, starting with toe and camber. To understand the steps I'm taking to improve the handling of this car, let's talk about toe and camber real quick. If you don't know, camber is the angle of the wheel relative to the vertical profile of the wheel. Depending on the tilt, it's either considered positive, zero, or negative camber. Love 'em or hate 'em, stance cars are an example of negative camber, and one you'll probably remember. Positive camber makes your car more stable, but negative camber gives you a lot more control in how your vehicle feels in a corner. Toe is a measurement that determines how much the front and or rear of the wheels are turned in or out from a straight ahead position. That's a little hard to understand with just words, so this is a good picture to show you what the differences are. Zero toe makes your car feel really neutral, but toe out makes your car dive into corners a lot faster, and it's pretty common for race cars. In other words, there's a lot of tunability you have to consider to get your car to feel good. That's why alignments are really important. Any deviations from neutral toe and neutral camber are going to make your car handle very differently, and it's going to cause a lot of uneven tread wear. So keep that in mind. I find it useful to break suspension upgrades into a few distinct stages. Here's the problem of just putting coilovers on a car, and it's something that not a lot of people really talk about since coilovers are such a buzzword. Cars have control arms which govern toe and camber. From the factory, these are generally fixed length and are set up so that at factory ride height your car handles as best as the manufacturer wanted. If you lower your car with stock control arms, then your toe and camber are going to be way out of whack even though your center of gravity is lower. This means you may not actually handle that much better. Thankfully, there are ways to fix this by installing aftermarket control arms that have adjustable lengths. This allows you to fully maximize the benefits of lowering your car with proper toe and camber. So my first step for the TT is going to be installing adjustable control arms for both the front and the rear. This week we're going to be focusing on the rear. After that, we're going to put some coilovers on the car, and the final step is going to be getting the car corner balanced and the suspension tuned so that it handles as best as it possibly can. Think of suspension tuning as getting an alignment on steroids. Companies specialize in doing this and can set your car up for whatever you want it to be best at, that being road courses, autocross, or just good daily driving. They'll adjust the control arms, coilovers, and sway bars to every degree and maximize the ability of your car. In other words, that's the final boss of this project, and it's going to be something that's going to completely transform the car. But we've got a lot of work to do before then. Let's focus on the rear suspension for today. The rear of the suspension has two control arms on each side. I want as much adjustability as possible, so I ordered the top and the bottom. But for coilovers, you can get away with just doing the bottoms. These are gorgeous and from a company called Megan Racing. They are a really well-known company for aftermarket JDM parts, and they just got into the Euro scene. These are designed specifically for TT225s and R32s. They're adjustable and a notable upgrade over stock, plus the blue is going to match my rear sway bar, which is always a plus. Installing these is actually really straightforward, it just takes a little bit of manual effort. I jacked the car up and took off the wheel. Make sure you don't use any part of the suspension when you jack the car up. Use the actual jack stand location. The parts we're replacing are pretty easy to see. Here is the top one and the bottom one is down there. These bolts look like they're really far back, but honestly, it's not too difficult to reach them. I suggest using some anti-seize on these bolts because they can be a little bit stuck if your car is at all rusty. Mine isn't too bad, thankfully. First, I removed the xenon headlight leveling bracket, and then I went ahead and removed the bolts for the lower control arm. I'm going to do this one first since it's a little easier to get out. It really is as simple as just removing these two bolts. Here's what it looks like when it comes out of the car next to the new one, and I think you can agree that the new one looks a lot better. In order for us to actually install this adjustable control arm and get the car drivable to the point where we can drive it to the alignment shop, we need to get this length set to the same as the stock control arm. Initially, I used a tape measure to make sure the lengths were the same, but actually the most useful part was using the bolts from the actual installation. When the control arms are set to the exact same length, you'll be able to hook the bolts through both of them and they're going to be the same height. It's always good to double check with a measuring tape though. Once the length was set, I used 2 wrenches to lock in this length. Another thing you might notice that is actually pretty cool is that the bushing looks a little bit different. The aftermarket control arm actually comes with something called a Heim joint, which is similar to a rubber bushing, but much more able to translate road feel. So along with being stiffer than rubber, it's actually going to feel better too. My only complaint with these control arms is that the Heim joint is slightly too wide, and I mean slightly, so it's a really tight fit to get it into the bracket. But so long as you're willing to put in a little bit more manual effort, lining this one up is really easy. To get the bottom one in place, you need to put a little bit of pressure on the rotor, however. Then you can reinstall the headlight level sensor. Now here is when you might be wondering what the torque spec for all of this is. It is warm outside. We have to torque these down with the car at ride height, so we're going to get all of them in place hand tight, hopefully not over tight, and then we're going to put the wheels back on, drop the car, put it on ramps, and then tighten them from the ramps. So we're going to do the upper one now. In order to ensure that the bushings are torqued properly, you need to torque them down with the car at ride height, meaning we're going to use ramps at the end of doing both sides. Removing the upper control arm is easier than removing the lower control arm since there's no headlight leveling switch.
That one was such a pain.
The only difficult part about doing the top control arm is that there is a subframe bolt that can get in the way if you don't twist the bolt out properly. You can always temporarily remove it though. I used the stock control arm yet again to get the right length for the adjustable one that we're about to install. And just like before, I locked in the lengths and then inserted it into the car. I used an Allen wrench to get myself lined up properly, which was helpful before trying to insert the bolt. Then it was only a matter of putting the bolts back in and getting them hand tight. Once this is all done, we'll put the wheel back on and move to the other side.
It's actually a different day. We're going to start the second side of this install. Took some time to get some of the bolts out, so I moved it to the next day. As you can tell by my change of outfit and my haircut, now it's time to continue.
Believe it or not, but the passenger side is actually easier than the driver's side since there's no xenon headlight leveling system we have to worry about. In other words, the only thing stopping us from driving the car is 4 bolts and a little bit of adjusting. Looking at how old most of the suspension is, it's going to look great in a few weeks after I've replaced almost all of it. Just like the last side, I'm going to attempt the bottom control arm first starting by using some bolt penetrator to get some of the rust off. I'm super grateful that my car isn't very rusty and that nothing is really stopping these bolts from coming out. It makes working on jobs like this a lot less frustrating. One thing I haven't touched on yet is how you actually set the lengths on these adjustable control arms. Both sides of the control arm are threaded in and have a lock bolt on it. The lock bolt is really only there so that you don't adjust it while you're driving. Since both ends are threaded, you could theoretically get the correct distance by unthreading just one side, but my personal approach is to try to make it so that both sides are unthreaded an even amount and the correct distance is achieved. That way there's an even amount of threads on both sides and the pressure is spread evenly. The bottom control arm went in without a stitch, and the top one is the only one that's moderately annoying, and that's just because it's a really tight fit to get the heim joint into the part where it connects into the car. I had to play around a lot with approach angles and different ways of getting the joint to actually line up with the holes properly, but once you get it in, it is incredibly satisfying. I then went ahead and reinstalled the bolt connected to the subframe. This is the one that is in the way when you're trying to install the upper control arm, but it comes out pretty easily. Once these are all hand tightened, we need to reinstall the wheel and get the car on the ground so we can torque it down. All these control arm joints need to be torqued properly at ride height, so I'm going to put the rear of the car on ramps. This car hasn't been driven a while, so hopefully she fires up alright.
Everything is torqued down. Now I'm going to try to measure each side and make sure they're relatively similar.
Now, if you want to be really smart, you're going to get an alignment after you install your control arms. And I mean a professional alignment. Like I said earlier, I'm rebuilding almost all the suspension on this car, and each one of those components by itself would require its own alignment. I'd rather not schedule 4, so I'm going to wait till everything is done and then get one final racing alignment at the end. That's why I spent so much time making sure the lengths of the adjustable control arms were the same as what I took off from the car, which was already in alignment. I went ahead and took the car for a really quick drive to see if I noticed any differences, and honestly, there wasn't a huge difference, which is exactly what I expected. The car drives almost the same, which is exactly what I wanted at this stage. These control arms aren't going to impact the way that the car drove because I set them to the same length. Once we tune the suspension with the rest of the suspension mods, that's when the difference is really going to happen. Just replacing the rear control arms, however, does have benefits such as improved rear feel of the car. These really help the road feel of the rear of the car specifically, which makes it honestly a lot more predictable. Road feel is one of those things that's kind of hard to explain, but if you have felt it, you kind of understand it. Some cars feel really numb, and thankfully the TT never felt numb, but this is a drastic improvement. Plus, the new suspension pieces look absolutely gorgeous and really pretty up the rear suspension. I can't wait to see what it looks like with new end links and the rest of the coilover system. Here's what it looks like so far. This suspension upgrade is something that I've wanted to do to this car since I bought it. It's something that initially seemed incredibly daunting to do, but as you do research and learn, it's something that's honestly really fun to work on. These improvements are tangible, and you directly see the reward that you're getting by putting in work, so they're really fulfilling. Plus, it makes daily driving your car that much more fun. So in the end, it is all worth it. I want to thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate all your support, and it blows me away how much you guys are enjoying this series. If you enjoyed the video or learned something, or you're just excited for the next video and want to support me, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. It truly helps me out. Either way, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch my video. It means a lot to me, and seriously, I can't thank you enough. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a wonderful day.